Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com with this next in a series of videos of working with FoalTS. Okay, and I'm just going to walk you through some changes I made before we start going in knee deep into the controllers because there's a lot involved. Took me a while to kind of get it all configured, but it works. So let's see here. First thing we're going to want to do, I want to show you is what I did with my models. Just so you can understand why I did it and that you can do it if you want. So if I go back to my entities, I go to my one of these entities. I need to do cascade. Yeah. So what I did is I added this little piece here, cascade true, for a many-to-many relationship, which events and actors has. You can put it on one of them. You don't have to put it on both. It actually creates an error if you do it on both. But basically, what cascade means is that if you update, like if I update, like let's say I assign events to actors or something like that. So the minute that I update one, it's going to update the other. That's essentially what it does. Okay, so yeah, that's what that does. Because if not, otherwise, if I assigned an event to actors, I'd still then have to go back and then do a separate assignment of the actor to the event. It won't automatically do both. So that's a thing. So you're aware. Again, this is all in the type ORM documentation because type ORM is how we are creating our entities. Okay, and it's actually, there's a lot of stuff here. Very worthwhile read. Okay, but now the next step is our controllers. Now basically in your app folder there's the main controller, which is this. Okay, and basically every controller has its own file and it's its own class. And within the class you will define all your routes. So this one, as the main controller, really what it does is just kind of collects all your subcontrollers. You could define some routes here as well, but there's really no need to at the moment. So I've defined two categories. There's two subrouters. The API subrouter kind of comes default because it's assuming that you're probably going to be building out an API, because the standard way of doing things these days is you build out your API, then you create a single page application in the front. That's just how it generally goes. So you'll have that controller already set up, and then we created it in one for the authentication. And you're going to want to do that through the command line, because that way it just kind of configures everything for you. So to show you the command for that, that's going to be right over here, the auth controller right here. And this is the tutorial, their to-do tutorial on the full documentation, but there is this command here. So full generate controller, so we'll create the controller file with this name, and then this registers it. So this way it's already shows up here. So it'll be built, it'll be added here, and you'll get its own separate file in the controllers folder over here. So here we have our auth controller. Okay, and always make sure you pay attention to what I'm importing up here, because if you don't import all the right stuff, you're going to be seeing, but you copy everything I do otherwise, you're going to start seeing getting a lot of errors when you run build or when you run develop. But let's kind of walk through what we have here. There's context. So if you've used Express, basically what generally happens is that when you define your routes, you have a request and response as a parameter, and you can then call on the request and response. Here it's going to work a little bit differently. Okay, context is going to have your request object, which is going to be one of several things inside the context object. So basically, if you want to access all the things you would see in the Express request object, you'd go to context.request. So context.request body, context.request params, all that stuff. Dependency, I'm not quite sure what this one does at the moment. Now, all these HTTP responses, so instead of having a response as part of the parameter, you'll choose what kind of response you want to send, and you'll use one of these HTTP response functions. But you don't need all of them all the time, so here I'm only importing HTTP response redirect, which is the idea is that it's going to return the HTTP response, the number, and then redirect you to another page. So in the documentation, that's all under here in controllers. You can see all the different HTTP response functions you can use. That's going to be sort of way down here. Okay, so basically you would import the one you need. Okay, and then you can put in like a message or a point to a file or whatever you need to do in there. Okay, so we're using that for a response. Post is because we're going to have some post routes. Remove session cookie because we're going to be creating sessions and destroying sessions in our auth routes. So we have remove session cookie, set session cookie. We have session because we'll be using that as well. Token required. Token required is what they refer to as a hook. Hooks are just other decorators that you add to, let's say, here's my route, and then I can add this hook here. That in this case, this hook validates the body, which I also have to import right here. But I can also use the hook token required to make sure that you're logged in and the session is you have a session token. Okay, and then there's another one for checking your password, verify password. Cool, and that's all from the full core library. Now we're also going to want, so this is where that dependency comes in here. So we need this dependency hook that's going to for some reason refer to this type ORM store. Type ORM again is the object relationship mapper. I'm assuming it's storing some information there. I'm not quite sure exactly the function of this at the moment, but you have to make sure it's imported for this piece to work. So I have to make sure dependencies imported over here from full core, and make sure that type ORM store is imported from the full type ORM library. And then get repository is kind of like how we actually access the database. So basically all those entities we created before, we're going to use this get repository thing that's going to access that particular table, and we'll be able to query it and all that stuff. So that's, you need that there from type ORM. And then of course, since we're making routes that revolve around the user entity, we need to make sure we import the entity. User. Cool. So we have our post route. So again, every route always starts with a decorator that determines whether it's a post, a get, a delete route. Okay, so that's what this decorator here says. It says, hey, this is going to be a post route. This is going to be a post. If a post request gets sent to this login endpoint, and since this is part of the auth controller, it's actually technically auth/login. What we're going to do is then we're going to look at the body, because again, this post one is actually to log in. So we're assuming that someone's filled out a form with their login name, email, and their password. But we want to make sure they sent the right information. So this decorator here is going to validate that what they sent in. Okay, so the request body, which would be whatever content they submitted from the form. So we're saying, hey, do we want anything extra beyond what we're looking for? Nah. So if there's extra stuff, throw it out. Properties. The things we're looking for is an email. That's going to be coming in as a string. But make sure that it's within a format of email. Okay. Now, what kind of types and email formats do you have? This is using a library called AJV, I think. And I think we have that. They mentioned that right. I don't think it's there. Yeah, here it is actually. FoalTS uses AJV. Okay, so basically in that validate decorator, as far as like what parameters you can use and all that stuff, that's going to be part of this library over here. So you'd have to read this documentation. I mean, up to this point, I haven't had to really go look in here to get it to work, but you know, to kind of see the full functioning of it, it's all here. Okay. So I'm saying, hey, I need an email, I need a password, which is also a string. Now required, which fields are required for this to work? Email and password. So if those two things aren't present, I don't have those in the request body, we have a problem. And this is all coming in as an object, and you have to define the type of how it's going to look like. Cool. So that's what the validate body decorator does. And then below these decorators, we have a function. And that's the function that's going to run when this post request is made to that endpoint. So it's always decorators, then the function for the endpoint. Okay. So in this case, it's an asynchronous function called login. Doesn't really matter what the name is. Whatever is after this post decorator is just going to play out for that route. Okay. And then the variable is called context. So we usually abbreviate it as CTX. But what it is, it's a context item, which is a special object as part of the full library that's defined here, which has several different things. Has not just the request body, but a few other things, like it stores the user token in there and stores session in there. There's a bunch of little pieces in there. Okay, let me actually go find the list of what's in that object in the full documentation. I remember right, that was right over, I think here. Context. No, where is it talking about the context? Actually, I think it might have been over here when in the controllers piece of the documentation. Context, here we go. So there's 4 things. There's the request body, as we mentioned, like that's the express request body. There's a state object, so you can share data between hooks, and then hooks are those other decorators that kind of add functionality. We haven't really played with that. There's a user item on there that stores information about the current user, so it's separate from the request body. So you might be storing stuff in the request body, and then there's the session object that stores all the session data. So it would be like context.session, context.user, context.state, context.request. Cool. So that's what that is. It's just defining that parameter that we can use throughout the route. So we're saying, hey, when this route gets triggered, I was testing it, so I wanted to make sure there was some logs for me to kind of see that everything's working. So console.log, login process begins. And then here we're saying, hey, we're going to define a variable called user. And user, what we're going to do is we're going to look inside the entity user. So we're going to look in that table. So get repository says, hey, I'm going to go look in the database for the table for entity user. And I'm going to find one, in this case, I'm finding one thing. What am I finding? I'm finding one thing that has an email that matches the email that was passed in on the form. So this gets context.request.body, because again, it's the body of the request. And we passed in something called email. Okay. So we're just going to make sure that it matches the email that was submitted. Now, if the email doesn't match up, or we don't find the user, we'll have a little error there. Then it's going to check the password. So here it uses this function called verify password to compare the password versus what's in the database. And if that doesn't work, it gets redirected. But if all that works, then it's going to create a session. So it's saying, hey, this variable session is going to create and save a new session based on this user, which just basically creates a cookie with some information on your computer. I console log it because I was, again, testing. And then it makes a response, which just basically redirects you back to the main page. Okay. And then it just saves it in a cookie and gets it all set up. So that's the login. And these pretty much are already built into Foal. Like when you, I would recommend just using the ones in the most of it in the documentation, because it's pretty a generic authentication route, so that pretty much should work for pretty much any situation. You might have to do a little tailoring here and there, but the auth routes already in the documentation when you read like right over here for the multi-user to-do list. So if you go to auth controllers and hooks, this here is a pretty good prototype for a starting point for your authentication routes. Cool. But again, I'm not doing a to-do list. I'm doing this whole sort of political CRM thing. So my events and actors, which I defined, I had to go back and create routes for that. So that's what's in my API controller, creating an API so that once you're logged in, you can create actors. And here we have to import a whole bunch more stuff. Okay, so again, make sure that you import everything and look at the documentation if there's something you forgot. But again, we got context, but now we're going to be doing delete routes because we may need to delete actors, we may need to delete events. We're going to want to go be able to retrieve events, so get requests, much more different response items. HTTP response created, that's if you make something. HTTP response no content, that's if something's done, but I'm not sending you anything back. HTTP response not found, that means we didn't find what we were looking for. HTTP response okay. Everything worked as expected. Cool. Okay, we're going to be making post routes. We're going to be making put routes so you can edit. So post is for when we want to create something. Now, the actual verb really doesn't mean anything. I could theoretically just do everything through get routes. The only real downside to that is when you do a get route, especially if you're submitting forms, it's going to show the form data in the URL, which is a security issue. So in that case, you'd rather probably do that as a post route. But as far as using like put and delete routes, that's more semantics. So that way it's clear when someone reads the code that, hey, this particular route has a function of delete. This particular route has a function of editing, which was what the put's for. But it doesn't, again, functionally doesn't matter. Token required. This is going to be a hook to make sure that the person's logged in. It's going to look for that login token. Validate bodies is the same thing as we talked about before. We just make sure that the form data that we submitted is what we expected. Dependency is going to work with that hook. I'm not sure if we actually use it in this particular page, but it's there. HTTP response to redirect. It's just another response where you redirect into another page. Remove session cookie is to remove the session, which really doesn't get done here, but I think I imported it anyways because I went a little import crazy while I was trying to figure out some errors, but I got it all working. And again, session, we do need access to the session object, so that stuff needs to be there. Checking password, again, probably not in these particular set of routes, but I imported it anyways. And then validate params. Same idea as validate body, except params are not submitted from a form. So when you submit data from a form, it's going to show up as part of your request body. When you put data in the URL, it's going to show up as a request parameter or params. So if I want to validate to make sure that my params are what I expect them to be, then I'm going to need validate params. So one's to validate params, the other one's to validate body, but they work the same way. Okay, this is so that way I can go grab a user. This is part of a special library for Foal that sort of mixed with a typo-arm that help you work with typo-arm easier. So that's what this is. Get repository, you saw that in the last one, and then I'm using all my entities in this particular batch, so I had to import all my entities. So I have access to all of them because I need to look up users, I need to look up actors, events, the whole deal. Cool. So now what we did here, so again, the controller is a big class, but notice that I put a hook right above the class, this token required hook. Okay, and let me just make sure I'm using the right terminology. I'm pretty sure those are referred to as hooks, but let's go back over here. Services and dependency injection hooks. Pretty sure all these sort of like, that's what you refer to as all those little decorators that add additional functionality to your routes or your whole controller, referred to as hooks. And you could generate hooks if you want to. Probably not something we're going to be doing in this particular tutorial, but just so you know, it's in the, yep, so like there's a bunch of different hooks that are built into Foal. Okay. So again, ones we already know we're using, validate body, validate params. None of these other ones we're really using right now, but they're there. It's all in the documentation. It's really good documentation. Cool. And so basically all this is saying is that it's going to look to see if the session token that was created on login is accessible. Okay. So any route in this controller will require token authentication. So if they're not logged in, they won't be able to access these routes. Okay, which I tested. Cool. So the first one's just a get. It just basically gets you the list of actors in the database for that user. So notice it says get. So the way this reads, it says get actors. That's the function that's attached to the route. So it's a get route for the /actors, which would be technically API/actors because it's part of the API controller. We pass through context. We're going to have a variable called actor, which equals the first actor we find in the actors table in the database. That's well, not the first, but all the actors we find in the actors table that is attached to this particular user. So we're looking them up based on the user. Okay. And then we respond, say, hey, everything worked out fine, and we're going to send them back the list of actors. Which later on when we build our front end, I'm going to be pulling that in through an API request and then populating the page using that object. Now I'm also going to need to create a form to create an actor, and that's what this route's for. It's a post to create a new actor. And when they submit it, I need to make sure that all the variables are right. So here's my validate body, making sure that all the variables are right. Okay, the only one I really say has to be in there is name. And again, it comes in as an object. And then what I do is I create a new actor. So in this case, actor equals a new actor. And then that new actor, I make sure that all the variables inside that actor object equals the stuff that's inside the request body. So that way it's all good. Then I make sure to assign the user, because it's, again, we have to make sure that we keep track of which actors belong to which user. So that's going to be already stored in the context, because again, context stores that information. And get repository. So then what happens, we go back to the table and say, hey, can you save that actor we just created in the actors table? And then we send the response back to the client saying, hey, the thing was created, it all worked out well. Here's a copy of that actor we just created for you. Okay, and same ID with delete. Now this works this way. The route is, so basically it would be API/actors/ the ID number for that particular actor if you want to delete them. And then what it does, and this is what's called a param. So that's why we're going to use validate params, because we're going to want to make sure that whatever we put here, so when you see the colon ID, it just means colon means this is a variable, and then ID is the variable name. So we want to make sure, so basically how does that look like? It's context.request dot params. Okay, for some reason in the documentation they kind of use this as any syntax. I'm not quite sure why, but it's there and it works. So not playing with it, but it should also just work if I do context.request.params.id, because that's technically the variable location. But I'm making sure that the ID is a number, and that's good. And then again, actor, we're going to go inside the actor table, find one, and find the first actor that matches that ID number, which there should only be one, because every ID number is supposed to be unique. Okay. Find one, and we're also making sure that it belongs to the right user. So that way if for some reason someone was able to manufacture while they're logged in a call to an ID that's not one of their users, they can't delete other people's users. Because theoretically, I guess you could do that through Postman. You can create requests, even though you're logged in, to items that are not yours. So this just verifies that the one we're pulling is yours, because it's got to belong to the logged in user. So we're querying the ID and the user it's attached to. Now, if no actor is found, because that query didn't come up with any results, we respond with not found. Otherwise, we'll go get repository. We're going to go back to the actors database, that table, and we're going to move the particular actor that we found. Okay, and then respond that everything's okay, but give nothing else back. Okay, and this just kind of repeats over and over again. So basically the put is just how I update the deal. So again, I'm going to have a form where they would update or edit their actor. So this validate body is just going to make sure that all the right information is in the form. But how do I know which one to edit? The ID is going to be part of the URL, so I also, as a param, so I got to validate params as well to make sure that they're sending me the right information. So that's why this one looks a little extra long before I even get to the function edit actor. And then here, actor, we're going to go find the actor that's ID, matches the user. If not, we say, hey, we didn't find anything. Otherwise, just kind of like I did when we created it, I take what's in the body from the form you submitted, assign it to that actor. So I'm changing all the variables on that actor. And then in the end, we save it through get repository. We're going to save the actor we've edited back into the actors table. And then literally I did the same thing with events. So this is literally the same logic with events. Cool. So once you create all your routes, then what you'd want to do is you're going to want to run your app. I mean, I also would run app build. You might remember that from like when we were doing our migrations, like full app or full build :app, because it'll pick up on any errors. And basically, if you keep running it until you've kind of make sure that there's no errors, everything should be up and running. But how do I test it without having to go create the full website first? Okay, that's a lot of work. to find out in the end that you have all this other work that you didn't finish in the back end. So this is where something like Postman comes in. You could use curl. Curl can be a little bit more work. Okay. So now I have the server running. So let me just double check to make sure the server is running. So you can see that here. It's running. Okay, listening on port 3001. Okay, and then a second ago I created a user, and I logged in, and then the login came fine. So actually, let me log back out. So let me actually get rid of all this for a moment. I don't want to send any of that. So Postman is a software you can download for free. It makes this kind of thing much, much easier. So what I want to do, and again, we're on localhost 3001 because we're running it locally, and it says right here, we're on port 3000 and, no, not there, here. We're listening on port 3001. Which if you ever wanted to change that, that would be in your, I think it's right here, index.ts. No, it's in this index.ts inside the source folder. That's right here. So if you wanted to change the port for whatever reason, that's where that is. If you're going to deploy this to Heroku, you will need to eventually change it, but we'll cross that bridge much later. Okie dokie. So let's see here. So that's going to be the auth route. I want to do /logout. I don't think I need to add anything else to that route. So let me just double check. Auth controller. Logout, yes, just /logout. It's a post request. Okay, so again, you can change your verb here to one of the other verbs. So I want it to be post because again, according to here, it's a post request to log out. And it's auth logout here because again, this is a subcontroller to the main app controller. This auth controller is defined here, and any routes that are here are going to start off with auth. So it's auth logout. So if I run that, it should end my session. See what it does. Okay, I think my session was already technically ended. From every time you save, it's going to restart the server, so that can also have a tendency of ending your session. Okay, but let's log in and then log out. So I'll do auth login. Okay, make a post request, and I want to submit some form data. I don't want to necessarily lose what I've already made there. We're going to come back to that. So data I want to submit is going to be email. And the test account we created, we had an email of test2@alexmerced.com. And I had a password of uppercase T test 1985. So this would be my request body. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to send that to that route, hit send, then I'm gonna look for the response and see what it sends me. And that looks good. And just to double check, I'm gonna go take a look over here, and this looks good. See, there's my console log. The login process begins. It returned me the session that was created, which would only get created if everything went fine. So I can see that I logged in just fine. Good. So we know that my login route works. Now, just for the sake of making sure it all works, let's also try log out again and log out. Send. And that's still returned. Let me see what this did over here. Log out. Get /sign in. Okay, so it is running. What happens is that it reroutes you to sign in, and that's where it's erroring. Okay, because there is no sign in route. So as you see here, cookie return to token required, false. Yeah. Okay. So that means I need to log in again. So let's go back to Postman. me bring these back and make this again to log in. And hit send. And that looks good. Let me just double check over here. Good, I'm logged in again. Okay, so with that, I'm able to now, so I should have my session token available. So what I want to do is actually test creating a actor. So I'm going to go to auth, not auth, it's going to be API slash actor. Let me just double check that's actor, not actors. So it's going to be in the API controller. And it's going to be like one of the first ones. Let's go all the way to the top. Yeah, it's actors. So API slash actors. I want to create an actor, so that's a post request, so we'll keep it on post. And let's change some of the things here. So this time I don't want these two, but I want all these other ones. I was creating these earlier. Okay, we'll just say this is Bob. And his phone number is 555-555-5555. Okay. So that's Bob's information. Sending it as a post request to that endpoint. We hit send. Okay. Which looks good. It's sending us in the response. It's just basically the thing that we just created, because that's what this route does. If we go all the way to the end of the route, right here, it's just returning the actor created. So far it looks like it works, but let's make sure. So if I run a get request on this endpoint, according to my controller file, no, I don't have to submit anything. So let me just turn all that off. It should give me a list of all the actors I've created. That's this one right here. Get actors. It's just going to go in the database and find all my users' actors. So let's just make sure that it does that. And there they are. Okay, and there's me, the first one. Now what if I wanted to delete me from the database? Let's try the delete route. So that would be delete request, and let's go back to my delete. Yep, so delete actors ID. So that'd be / my ID is 1. Okay, so let's see if this works. Should just delete me from the database. And what did it give me back? Didn't give me back anything. That might be right. Let me actually take a look at the code for delete. What am I supposed to get back at the end? Oh, nothing. So no no content. So that looks like it worked out right, but how can we make sure? We're going to run that get again and make sure that I'm no longer in there. If that's the case, then it worked. So send. Cool. Yep, and see, ID number 1 is no longer there, just Bob number 2. Now what if I want to edit Bob and turn Bob into Alex? Okay, so what I'm going to do is put his ID there, because that's our put. And I have to make this a put request, because that's our edit route, which is this route. No, that's the last one. Yeah, put route. So put actors ID, so 2. And I'm going to re-enable all of these. Okay, except now I'm going to change this to edited, and it's going to be Alex now, and that's that. Let's make sure that it works. Hit send. Okay, I get no response back. Is that what I meant to give? Let's see here. HTTP response. No, that's not the very end. Here we go. HTTP response, no content. So that works. And I can take a look at the header if I want, but not super helpful. Okay, cool. And then I can see all these requests coming into my server right here on the terminal. So one last check to make sure that everything worked out fine. Let's make one last get request to that actors endpoint. And hit send. Okay, where's my, okay, let's go to the body of my return. And there we see, like, now it's ID number 2, but it's no longer saying Bob because we edited it. And if we go to some comments, that's interesting. It just says some information, not some information edited. Interesting. It did not change the comments, which I think I know why. See, this is how we catch bugs. This is why Postman is so awesome. Because I don't think I rest.body.comments event. No, I do. Event.comments, body.comments, type string. Interesting. Title. Works up here. What did I do different over here? Let me just copy this from here. And make sure this is all the same. Oh, that's not what I wanted to happen. Copy that. So it should technically work. Oh, I see, because I'm not assigning the comments down here. There we go. And there we go. See, the comments, this line wasn't here before. That was the problem. So while I did schema it, I never actually assigned it. So that was the reason why the comment didn't get edited. But see, like by doing Postman, taking a look at your request responses, you can catch bugs and go from there. So hopefully this is the next step. So now the focus is getting your API all up and running and all the data. So once your entities are all set, your API is working, you're able to make all the requests that you need to make and all your routes will work. Then after that, the next step is just going to be building the front end of our website. It's just the rest is that it's all downhill from here. So I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Have a great one.